The acrid smell of smoke and decay hung heavy in the morning air as Amelie pressed her back against the crumbling concrete wall, her dark eyes scanning the abandoned street below. 3 years had passed since the world had cracked open and bled death, since the first reports of the infection had spread from laboratory to laboratory, city to city, continent to continent. Now, in what remained of Johannesburg, silence had become both blessing and curse. Her callous fingers tightened around the grip of her machete, its blade dulled from countless encounters with the shambling remnants of humanity. At 28, Amelie had learned to read the subtle signs that meant survival or death, the way shadows moved differently when something hungry lurked within them, the particular quality of stillness that preceded an attack, the sound of dragging feet that could be heard 3 blocks away if you knew how to listen. Below her, the street stretched empty save for the occasional piece of debris tumbling in the wind. Overturned cars created a maze of rusted metal, their windows long since shattered, their contents either looted or rotted beyond recognition. Weeds pushed through cracks in the asphalt, nature slowly reclaiming what humanity had abandoned. It would have been beautiful, Amelie thought, if it weren't so thoroughly haunted. A soft whistle, 3 short notes followed by 1 long, echoed from the building across the street. Amelie's heart rate quickened, not from fear, but from anticipation. That was Kahine's signal. After 2 days of reconnaissance, they had finally found what they were looking for. Amelie descended the fire escape with practiced silence, her boots finding purchase on rungs that had been tested and retested over months of use. This section of the city had become their territory, mapped and memorized until every alley and doorway held familiar significance. But familiarity bred complacency, and complacency meant death. She moved through the shadows, keeping to the routes they had cleared and marked. Red paint dabbed on walls indicated safe passages. Yellow meant caution. Black meant run. It was a language born from necessity, understood by the 7 women who had found each other in the chaos and decided that survival was not enough. They would rebuild. They would reclaim. They would ensure that something good rose from the ashes of everything they had lost. The building where Kahine waited had once been a pharmacy. Its windows were boarded up, but gaps between the planks allowed for observation and, if necessary, escape. Amelie slipped through the side entrance, noting the fresh scratches on the doorframe that indicated recent passage. Kahine's work, certainly, but the sight still made her pause. In this world, any sign of movement could herald either salvation or doom. "Sister," Kahine whispered from behind the pharmacy counter, her voice barely audible even in the tomb-like silence. At 35, she was the oldest of their group, her hair now streaked with premature silver from 3 years of constant vigilance. Her face bore the kind of hardness that came from making impossible decisions, but her eyes still held the warmth that had convinced 6 desperate women to follow her into the unknown. "What did you find?" Amelie asked, settling beside her and accepting the small pair of binoculars Kahine offered. The warehouse district, 2 kilometers northeast. Neil was right about the supply depot. Kahine's voice carried a mixture of excitement and apprehension. But there's more than just supplies there. Through the binoculars, Amelie could see the distant industrial complex. Tall chain-link fences topped with barbed wire surrounded several large buildings. Movement was visible within the compound, but at this distance, it was impossible to determine whether that movement belonged to the living or the dead. "How many?" Amelie asked. "Unknown, but there are vehicles. Working vehicles with fuel." Kahine paused, allowing the significance of that discovery to settle. In a world where transportation meant the difference between life and death, where the ability to move quickly could determine whether you found safety or became trapped, working vehicles represented hope itself. Amelie lowered the binoculars and studied her friend's face. "And the others?" "Waiting for our signal. This could be everything we need to establish the new settlement. Medical supplies, weapons, food that isn't 3 years expired." Kahine's voice grew softer. "Or it could be a trap that gets us all killed." The weight of leadership settled on Amelie's shoulders like a familiar burden. 7 women looked to them for decisions that would determine their fate. 7 women who had lost everything but refused to lose each other. 7 women who had chosen to believe that somewhere in this broken world, they could carve out a space for hope. Hashtag Part 2. The safe house had been a community center before the world ended, its cheerful murals of children playing now serving as ironic backdrop to the weapons cache and survival supplies that lined its walls. Amelie and Kahind entered through the hidden entrance they had constructed, a section of wall that appeared solid but rotated inward with the proper pressure applied to a specific point. Inside, 5 women looked up from their various tasks with expressions of carefully controlled hope. 3 years of living on the edge of extinction had taught them all to temper optimism with realism. But the prospect of major supply discovery was enough to crack even their well-practiced stoicism. Nia sat cross-legged on a salvage cushion, her fingers dancing across the keyboard of a solar-powered laptop. At 24, she was their technology specialist, a former computer science student who had learned to hack into abandoned systems and coax life from dead electronics. Her natural hair was gathered into intricate braids that she redid whenever stress threatened to overwhelm her, a meditative practice that had become their unofficial barometer for how dire their situation truly was. The satellite imagery confirms it, Nia said without looking up from her screen. The compound has been maintained. There are solar panels on the roofs, and the thermal readings suggest active habitation. Across the room, Zubri looked up from the rifle she was cleaning, her movements never pausing even as she listened. At 31, she was their weapons expert and strategist, a former military engineer whose knowledge of explosives and tactical planning had saved their lives more times than anyone cared to count. Her face bore a scar that ran from her left temple to her jaw, a souvenir from their second week together, when they had underestimated the intelligence of a pack of infected. Active habitation by whom? Zubri asked, her voice carrying the skepticism that had kept them alive. If there are survivors there, they might not be friendly. And if there aren't, she didn't need to finish the thought. They had all encountered settlements that appeared safe on the outside, only to discover that their inhabitants had long since joined the ranks of the shambling dead. Sometimes those discoveries came with enough warning to escape. Sometimes they didn't. Django, who had been sitting silently in the corner, finally spoke up. The risk might be worth it. At 26, she was their scavenger and scout, possessing an almost supernatural ability to move unseen through dangerous territory. Her slight frame and quiet manner often led people to underestimate her, a mistake that had cost several hostile survivors dearly. We're running low on medical supplies again. McKenna's infection isn't responding to what we have left. All eyes turned to the makeshift medical area where McKenna lay on a cot, her usual vibrant energy diminished by the fever that had plagued her for 3 days. At 23, she served as their medic despite having only veterinary training before the apocalypse. Her knowledge of anatomy and treatment had translated surprisingly well to human medicine, but she was limited by their dwindling pharmaceutical resources. Folake, who sat beside McKenna's bed, looked up with worry evident in her dark eyes. At 29, she was their negotiator and diplomat, skilled at reading people and situations in ways that had prevented conflicts from turning deadly. Her gift for languages had proven invaluable in their encounters with other survivor groups, but no amount of linguistic skill could negotiate with infection. The antibiotics we need aren't available anywhere else, Folake said quietly. We've checked every pharmacy and clinic within 50 kilometers. If that compound has medical supplies, then we take the risk. Delilah finished from her position by the window. At 27, she served as their lookout and early warning system, possessing hearing and observational skills honed by 3 years of constant vigilance. Her ability to detect threats had prevented more ambushes than the rest of them combined, but even she couldn't see through walls or predict every danger. Amelie felt the weight of their collective gaze and the heavier burden of command that had somehow fallen to her despite her never seeking it. Leadership in their group was fluid, with each woman taking charge in her area of expertise. But when it came to decisions that could affect all their lives, the others looked to her. We scouted properly first, she said finally. Full reconnaissance. We watch for at least 2 days, map every entrance and exit, identify threats and opportunities. Then we make a plan that accounts for every possibility we can think of. Kahind nodded approvingly. I can take Django and do the initial survey. We'll set up observation posts and document everything. And if we find survivors, Zubri asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it stated clearly. We approach carefully, Amelie replied. We've learned that people can be more dangerous than infected. But we've also learned that isolation will kill us just as surely as any monster. If there are good people there, people who might join us or trade with us, then we need to know. The room fell silent as each woman contemplated the implications. They had found each other through chance and desperation. 7 strangers who had become family through shared survival. The thought of expanding that family was both exciting and terrifying. More people meant more safety, more skills, more hope for the future. But it also meant more mouths to feed, more personalities to navigate, more potential for betrayal. ## Part 3. Dawn broke gray and muted over the industrial district as Kahind and Django settled into their observation, post atop a grain silo 2 kilometers from the target compound. The elevated position provided an unobstructed view of the facility, while keeping them well beyond the range of casual observation. Through their shared binoculars, the complex spread out like a detailed model, every building and fence line visible. The compound was larger than they had initially realized. 6 main buildings arranged around a central courtyard, surrounded by a double fence topped with razor wire. Watchtowers stood at each corner, though whether they were manned was impossible to determine from this distance. Solar panels gleamed on several rooftops, and a wind turbine turned lazily in the morning breeze, confirming that the facility had power. Movement, Django whispered, passing the binoculars to Kahind. Northeast building, 2nd floor window. Kahind adjusted the focus and watched as a figure appeared briefly in the window before disappearing back into the interior. Human, definitely, but whether living or dead remained unclear. The figure had moved with purpose rather than the shambling gait of the infected, but 3 years of survival had taught them that assumptions could be deadly. Definitely inhabited, Kahind murmured, making notes in her waterproof journal. Question is by whom? They settled in for a long day of observation, taking turns with the binoculars and documenting everything they saw. The compound showed signs of organization and maintenance that spoke to intelligent habitation. Vehicles were parked in orderly rows rather than abandoned wherever they had stopped. The grounds appeared well-maintained, free of the debris and overgrowth that characterized most abandoned areas. As the morning progressed, more movement became visible. Figures appeared at windows and doorways, always briefly and never long enough for detailed observation. The pattern suggested either extreme caution or deliberate concealment, both of which raised questions about the inhabitants' intentions. There, Django pointed toward the main gate. Someone's coming out. A side gate opened and 3 figures emerged, moving with the confident strides of people comfortable in their environment. Even at distance, Kahind could see they were armed and alert, scanning their surroundings with the practiced eye of experienced survivors. They moved toward a cluster of abandoned buildings outside the compound's perimeter, disappearing from view behind the structures. Scavenging run, Kahind observed. They're venturing outside their defenses. That suggests either confidence or desperation. The day continued with sporadic observations. The scavenging team returned before noon with what appeared to be supplies. More figures appeared at various points throughout the compound, suggesting a population significantly larger than their own small group. By late afternoon, Kahind had counted at least 15 distinct individuals, though the actual number could be higher. As evening approached, lights began appearing in the windows, confirming the presence of electricity. The sight was both encouraging and unsettling. Power meant technology, comfort, and potential medical facilities. But it also meant resources worth defending and people who might not welcome visitors. We need to get closer, Django said as darkness began to fall. We're not learning enough from here. Kahind nodded, though the thought of approaching the compound filled her with apprehension. They had developed their survival strategies around caution and careful planning. Rushing into unknown situations was exactly the kind of mistake that had killed countless other survivors. Tomorrow night, she decided, we'll move to perimeter and see what we can learn. But we maintain distance and escape routes. At the first sign of trouble, we retreat. The night passed slowly, both women taking turns on watch while the other attempted to rest. The compound remained lit throughout the dark hours, suggesting either abundant power resources or significant security concern. Either way, it indicated a level of organization and capability that could be either promising or threatening. When morning came, they observed the same patterns as the previous day: regular movement, organized activities, and the unmistakable signs of functioning community. But questions remained about the nature of that community and whether they would welcome contact with outsiders. Kahine spent the day studying the compound's defenses, noting weaknesses and strengths with the eye of someone who had learned to think tactically. The fence was formidable but not impregnable. The watchtowers commanded excellent fields of fire, but had blind spots that could be exploited. The main gate appeared heavily reinforced, but the side gates looked more manageable. As evening approached again, both women prepared for their closer reconnaissance. They checked their weapons, tested their radio equipment, and reviewed their escape routes. In this new world, thorough preparation was the difference between returning home and becoming another cautionary tale. "Remember," Kahine whispered as they prepared to move out, "we're not here to make contact. We're here to gather information. We see what we can see, learn what we can learn, and get back to the others safely." Django nodded, her face serious in the gathering darkness. Both women understood that the next few hours would determine whether the compound represented hope or danger, opportunity or trap. The decision they made based on what they discovered would affect not just their own lives, but the lives of their 5 sisters waiting anxiously back at the safe house. Hashtag Part 4. The perimeter fence hummed with electrical current, a detail that became apparent only when Django noticed the small warning signs attached at regular intervals. The discovery forced them to reconsider their approach, as an electrified barrier indicated both significant power resources and serious security concerns. They crouched in the shadow of an abandoned truck, studying the compound from just 50 meters away. "Motion sensors," Kahine whispered, pointing to small devices mounted on the fence posts. "And cameras. This isn't just a settlement, it's a fortress." The level of security was both impressive and troubling. Such elaborate defenses required considerable resources and expertise to maintain, suggesting a well-organized and well-supplied community. But they also indicated a community that felt seriously threatened either by the infected or by other humans. Django pointed toward the main building, where warm light spilled from several windows. "Can you hear that?" Kahine strained her ears and caught the faint sound of voices, too distant and muffled to make out words, but clearly human conversation. The normalcy of it struck her forcefully. For 3 years, their own group had been one of the few sources of regular human interaction they had encountered. The idea of a community large enough for a casual conversation was both enticing and intimidating. A sudden flicker of movement caught their attention. The main gate was opening, and several figures emerged into the night. Unlike the daytime scavenging party, these individuals moved with the deliberate stealth of people conducting covert operations. They wore dark clothing and carried equipment that suggested a specific mission rather than general foraging. "Night patrol," Kahine breathed, recognizing the tactical formation. "They're sweeping the area." The patrol consisted of 4 individuals, moving in a diamond formation that maximized their field of observation while maintaining mutual support. Their discipline and coordination spoke to military or paramilitary training, adding another layer of complexity to the situation. A community with trained soldiers was either exceptionally safe or exceptionally dangerous. Django touched Kahine's arm and pointed toward their predetermined escape route. The patrol was moving in a pattern that would bring them dangerously close to their position within minutes. They had to move immediately or risk discovery. They began their withdrawal, moving with the silent efficiency born from 3 years of practice. Every step was placed carefully, every movement calculated to minimize noise and visibility. The skills that kept them alive in countless danger situations now served them as they retreated from what might be either salvation or doom. The journey back to their observation post took longer than the approach, as they were forced to take a circuitous route to avoid the patrol. By the time they reached safety, both women were exhausted and tense from the prolonged stress of potential discovery. "They're organized," Kahine said once they were secure. "Military-level organization. That patrol was professional, disciplined. These aren't just survivors scratching out an existence. This is a community with structure and leadership. Django nodded grimly. The question is whether that makes them friends or enemies. They spent the remainder of the night in tense observation, watching the patrol complete its circuit and return to the compound. The level of security and organization they had witnessed raised as many questions as it answered. A community capable of such sophisticated defenses might have the medical supplies McKenna desperately needed, but they might also see 7 women as either threats to be eliminated or resources to be exploited. As dawn approached, Kahine made a decision to return to the safe house. They had gathered enough information to brief the others, and further observation might risk discovery by the increasingly suspicious patrols. The journey back felt longer than usual, weighted down by the knowledge that they would soon have to decide whether to approach the compound or seek alternatives elsewhere. The safe house felt smaller when they returned, cramped and primitive compared to the sophisticated facility they had observed. Their 5 sisters looked up expectantly as they entered, hope and anxiety warring in their expressions. McKenna's condition had not improved in their absence, her fever rendering her listless and pale. "Well," Amelie asked simply. Kahine set down her pack and accepted the cup of water Folake offered. "It's not what we expected. It's bigger, better defended, and more organized than anything we've encountered. They have power, security, and what appears to be a significant population. But," Zubri prompted, reading the uncertainty in her voice, "but they're also heavily armed and extremely paranoid. The kind of defenses they've built aren't just for keeping out the infected. They're designed to repel human threats." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Each woman had encountered hostile survivors before, people who had responded to the apocalypse by becoming predators rather than trying to rebuild civilization. Such groups saw other survivors as competition for resources, or, worse, as resources themselves. "We need to make contact," Folake said finally. "If they're good people, they might be willing to trade or even accept us into their community. If they're not," she gestured toward McKenna's still form, "we don't have time to search elsewhere." Delilah spoke up from her position by the window. "And if they decide we're a threat, 7 women won't stand a chance against a fortified position with trained soldiers." The debate that followed was intense but quiet, each woman weighing survival against risk, hope against caution. They had survived by being careful, by avoiding unnecessary conflicts, by choosing flight over fight whenever possible. But circumstances were forcing them toward a confrontation they might not be able to avoid. ## Part 5. The decision to make contact came not from consensus, but from desperation. McKenna's fever had worsened during the night, and their remaining antibiotics were proving ineffective against whatever infection had taken hold. Folake's medical knowledge, extensive as it was for someone without formal training, had reached its limits. Without proper medication, McKenna would die within days. Amelie stood over her friend's unconscious form, feeling the weight of leadership settle heavily on her shoulders. In the early days after the collapse, leadership had rotated naturally among them based on expertise and situation. But increasingly, the others looked to her for the impossible decisions that could mean life or death for all of them. "We go in peace," she announced finally. "We approach openly, hands visible, weapons holstered but accessible. We offer to trade, to work, to contribute to their community in exchange for medical assistance." Zubri looked up from a map she had been studying. "And if they refuse, if they see us as threats or competitors, then we retreat and regroup," Amelie replied, though they all knew that retreat might not be possible once they were within range of the compound's defenses. "But we can't sit here and watch McKenna die, because we're afraid to take risks." The preparations took most of the morning. They selected items that demonstrated their value, without revealing their full capabilities. Nia's technical expertise was represented by a small collection of working electronics. Zubri prepared samples of their improvised explosives, carefully packaged to show competence without appearing threatening. Django gathered examples of rare components she had scavenged from dangerous locations. Folake spent time with McKenna, explaining their plan to her during brief moments of consciousness. The young medic's eyes showed understanding and gratitude, though she was too weak to voice her thoughts. Her deteriorating condition added urgency to their mission and steel to their resolve. "I'll stay with her," Delilah announced. "Someone needs to maintain security here, and if things go badly, she'll need protection." It was a logical decision, but everyone understood the unspoken implications. If the mission failed catastrophically, Delilah would be responsible for ensuring that McKenna didn't suffer and that their safe house didn't fall into hostile hands. It was the kind of contingency planning that had become second nature in their harsh new world. The 5 women who would make contact spent the afternoon reviewing their approach strategy. They would travel light, carrying only personal weapons and trade goods. Their heavy equipment would remain hidden at the safe house, both to avoid appearing threatening and to ensure that resources remained available if they didn't return. As evening approached, they made their final preparations. Each woman checked her weapons and equipment one last time. They reviewed their cover stories and contingency plans until every detail was memorized. Most importantly, they spent time together, sharing memories and affection in case this was their last opportunity to do so. "Remember," Kahine said as they prepared to leave, "we're not just representing ourselves. We're representing the possibility that good people can still find each other in this world. We show them what civilized survivors look like." The journey to the compound took place under cover of darkness, not to avoid detection, but to demonstrate that they posed no threat. Moving openly in daylight would have been safer from a tactical perspective, but it might have been interpreted as reconnaissance for an attack. By approaching at night, they signaled either peaceful intentions or spectacular overconfidence. They stopped 100 meters from the main gate, well within range of the compound's lights and security systems. Emily stepped forward slightly, her hands clearly visible and empty, and called out in a voice that carried clearly in the still night air. "Hello, the compound. We are survivors seeking medical assistance. We come in peace and wish to trade." The response was immediate and decisive. Bright lights blazed alive, turning night into harsh day and pinning them in brilliant illumination. Voices shouted commands from multiple directions, and a distinctive sound of weapons being chambered echoed from the walls. Within seconds, they found themselves surrounded by armed figures who had appeared from concealment with professional efficiency. Weapons on the ground. A voice commanded from somewhere behind the lights. "Move slowly, keep your hands visible, and nobody needs to get hurt." The 5 women complied carefully, placing their firearms and bladed weapons on the ground before stepping back with their hands raised. The situation was exactly what they had hoped to avoid, but at least they weren't being shot immediately. That had to count as progress of a sort. "We have a sick friend," Emily called out, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "She needs antibiotics. We're willing to work for them, trade for them, do whatever is necessary." A figure emerged from behind the lights, moving with confident authority. Even backlit and difficult to see clearly, there was something familiar about the silhouette. As the person approached, features became visible in the harsh glare, and Kahine felt her breath catch in her throat. The woman facing them was tall and commanding, with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun and scars that spoke of extensive combat experience. But it was her eyes that confirmed Kahine's sudden recognition, dark and intelligent and filled with the same mixture of caution and hope that had sustained them all for 3 years. "Sister," the woman said, her voice carrying across the years and the impossible coincidence of their reunion. "I never thought I'd see you again." Colonel Adunni Okafor had survived the apocalypse by transforming a military supply depot into a fortress of civilization. But seeing her younger sister Kahine standing in the glare of security lights threatened to crack the composure she had maintained for 3 years. The last time they had spoken, it had been over a crackling phone line as the world burned around them, each woman promising to find the other when the chaos ended. "Kahine!" Adunni breathed, stepping closer while her security team maintained their defensive positions. "My God, you're alive!" The reunion was complicated by circumstance and audience. Both women had survived by learning to trust cautiously and verify everything, but the bond between sisters transcended even apocalyptic paranoia. Adunni gestured for her people to lower their weapons while keeping them ready, a compromise between familial joy and leadership responsibility. "Your friend," Adunni said, focusing on immediate practicalities. "How sick?" "Fever, Infection. Not responding to basic antibiotics, Kahind replied, her military baron returning as she adapted to the formal situation. Our medic has done everything possible with limited resources. Adunni nodded curtly and turned to one of her subordinates. Dr. Chimamanda, prepare a medical assessment team. Full isolation protocols. She turned back to Kahind. We'll help your friend, but there are procedures. The safety of the community comes first. The next hour was a blur of activity and organization. Emily found herself impressed despite her wariness, as Adunni's people demonstrated the kind of systematic efficiency that had clearly kept them alive and thriving. A medical team was dispatched to the safe house under heavy escort, while the 5 visitors were processed through a quarantine protocol that was thorough without being hostile. The compound's interior revealed a level of organization that bordered on the miraculous. Clean corridors lined with functional lighting, common areas where people gathered to eat and socialize, workshops where various crafts and repairs were conducted with professional competence. It was civilization rebuilt from scratch, sustained by discipline and mutual cooperation. 67 people. Adunni explained as she led them through the facility. Military personnel, their families, and civilians we've rescued over the years. Everyone contributes according to their abilities. Everyone is protected according to their needs. Nia was fascinated by the computer systems and communications equipment she glimpsed in various rooms. Zubri noted the sophisticated weapons storage and maintenance facilities. Folake observed the social dynamics, noting the easy interactions between people of different backgrounds and ranks. Each woman processed the information through her own expertise, building a picture of a community that seemed almost too good to be true. The medical facility was a crown jewel of the compound, equipped with instruments and supplies that would have been impressive even before the apocalypse. Dr. Chimamanda Uzoma, a woman in her 50s with steady hands and kind eyes, explained her medical capabilities while preparing to treat McKenna. We've maintained contact with other survivor communities, Dr. Uzoma explained. Medical knowledge sharing, supply coordination, mutual support agreements. Isolated communities die. Connected communities thrive. The concept was revolutionary to women who had spent 3 years believing they were among the last functional groups of survivors. The idea of a network of communities, supporting each other and rebuilding civilization cooperatively, challenged every assumption they had made about the post-apocalyptic world. McKenna's treatment began immediately upon her arrival. Dr. Uzoma diagnosed a resistant bacterial infection that required specific antibiotics they had been unable to find. Under the doctor's care, with proper medication and equipment, the young medic's condition stabilized within hours. As the night progressed, the visitors found themselves gradually integrated into the compound's evening routines. Shared meals, communal planning sessions, and social activities that reminded them how much they had missed simple human interaction. The people of the compound were friendly but cautious, welcoming but aware that trust had to be earned over time. There are challenges, Adunni admitted during a private conversation with her sister. Resources are limited. Space is at a premium, and we've had to turn away people who couldn't contribute or who pose security risks. Building a community means making hard choices. Kahind understood the implication. Their group's acceptance wasn't guaranteed simply because of family connection. They would have to prove their value and integrate into the existing social structure. It was fair, logical, and completely terrifying after 3 years of independence. We've learned to be self-sufficient, Kahind replied. We can contribute skills, labor, whatever is needed. But we also need to know that we're joining a community, not just trading freedom for security. The conversation that followed was honest and sometimes difficult. Both women had changed during their separation, shaped by leadership responsibilities and survival pressures. The sisters who had shared childhood secrets were now commanders who had made life-and-death decisions for other people. Reconnection would require negotiating not just between individuals, but between the communities they represented. By morning, tentative agreements had been reached. The 7 women would be welcomed into the compound on a trial basis, contributing their skills while learning the community systems and values. It wasn't the simple reunion that might have been hoped for, but it was the beginning of something larger than either group could have achieved alone. Standing on the compound's walls as dawn broke over the ruined city, Emily found herself cautiously optimistic for the first time in years. The world remained broken and dangerous, but perhaps it wasn't as empty as they had believed. Perhaps community and civilization could be rebuilt one careful alliance at a time. Hashtag Part 7. The integration process proved more complex than anyone had anticipated. 3 weeks after their arrival, tension simmered beneath the surface of forced politeness as two very different survival philosophies struggled to coexist. The compound residents had survived through rigid hierarchy and adherence to military discipline, while the 7 women had thrived through flexible leadership and consensus decision-making. McKenna had recovered fully under Dr. Uzoma's care, but her gratitude toward the compound's medical facilities was tempered by frustration with their strict protocols. As someone accustomed to improvising treatments with limited resources, she chafed under the formal procedures and approval processes that governed medical decisions. "It's not that they're wrong," she confided to Emily during one of their evening walks around the compound's perimeter. "Their systems work and they've saved lives. But sometimes a medic needs to make quick decisions without consulting 3 different committees." Similar conflicts emerged across their group. Nia's technological expertise was welcomed, but her habit of modifying systems without formal approval had caused several minor incidents. Zuberi's tactical knowledge was respected, but her questioning of established security protocols was seen as undermining authority. Each woman found herself caught between appreciation for the compound's resources and frustration with its restrictions. The broader community watched these developments with interest and concern. Some residents welcomed the fresh perspectives and skills the newcomers brought. Others worried that their arrival might destabilize the careful balance that had sustained the compound for 3 years. Conversations in the mess hall often centered on integration challenges and whether the experiment would ultimately succeed. Adunni found herself mediating between her sister's group and her established community, trying to balance family loyalty with leadership responsibility. The position was uncomfortable and sometimes painful, particularly when legitimate complaints from either side required difficult decisions. "Change is hard," Dr. Uzoma observed during one of the weekly leadership meetings. "We've all survived by developing specific ways of doing things. Combining different approaches requires time and patience from everyone involved." The breakthrough came unexpectedly during their 4th week. An emergency beacon signal was detected from a location 30 kilometers north, indicating other survivors in immediate danger. The compound standard response protocol called for a small reconnaissance team to assess the situation before committing resources to a rescue operation. Django volunteered for the mission, her scouting skills perfectly suited to the requirement. But when the reconnaissance team returned with reports of a large group of survivors trapped by infected in an abandoned shopping complex, the compound's careful protocols proved inadequate to the scope of the emergency. 43 people. Django reported to the hastily assembled leadership council, including at least 12 children. They're barricaded in a department store, but their defenses are failing. They have maybe 6 hours before the infected break through. The compound standard rescue protocols were designed for small groups and carefully planned operations. A rescue mission involving 43 people will require every available vehicle and most of their combat-capable personnel. It was exactly the kind of high-risk operation that military doctrine advised against. "We can't save them all," Lieutenant Commander Taiwo stated bluntly. "We don't have the transport capacity or the personnel to safely extract that many people while fighting through infected. We should focus on saving who we can." Emily found herself standing without conscious decision, her voice cutting through the debate with quiet authority. "We save them all or we save none. That's who we are. That's who we have to be if we're going to rebuild something worth having." The room fell silent as her words echoed in the air. It was a declaration of values that went beyond tactical considerations or resource management. It was a statement about what kind of community they wanted to be and what principles would guide their decisions. Kahin stood beside her sister, followed by Zuberi, then Nia, then each of their companions in turn. Across the room, Dr. Uzoma rose from her chair, then several of the compound's original residents. Within moments, nearly everyone in the room was standing in a silent vote of support for a mission that logic said was impossible. "Then we do the impossible," Dunny said finally, her voice carrying the weight of command and the pride of family. All departments, emergency protocols. We plan, we prepare, and we bring everyone home. The next few hours saw the compound transform into a precisely coordinated machine of preparation and determination. Every vehicle was checked and loaded. Every weapon was cleaned and distributed. Every person capable of contributing found a role in the massive operation that would either establish them as a community worth joining or get them all killed in the attempt. As dawn approached and the rescue convoy prepared to depart, Emily found herself standing beside a Dunny on the compound's walls. Two leaders who had been shaped by different approaches to survival, now united in a mission that embodied the best of both their philosophies. This is either go to work spectacularly or fail catastrophically, a Dunny observed with dark humor. Then let's make sure it works, Emily replied, checking her weapons one final time. 43 people are counting on us to be better than the world that's trying to kill them. The convoy rolled out as the sun crested the horizon, carrying the hopes and fears of everyone who had chosen to believe that civilization was worth fighting for, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Hashtag Part 8. The rescue mission stretched across 18 hours of careful planning, desperate fighting, and logistical miracles that none of them would have believed possible weeks earlier. The shopping complex had become a tomb of shattered glass and wandering dead, with 43 survivors huddled in an increasingly precarious defense. But the combined expertise of the compound's military precision and the newcomers' adaptive flexibility proved devastatingly effective. Zubri's explosives cleared evacuation routes, while Django guided rescue teams through maintenance tunnels the compound scouts had missed. Nia coordinated communications between multiple teams, while Dr. Uzoma and McKenna worked together to treat injuries with a combination of formal protocol and field improvisation. Each person contributed their greatest strengths to a mission that succeeded because it demanded the best from everyone involved. They returned to the compound as heroes, but the true victory was quieter and more lasting. The 43 rescued survivors brought new skills, perspectives, and energy to the community. More importantly, they arrived to find a settlement that had proven it would risk everything to save strangers, establishing a reputation that would echo through survivor networks for years to come. In the weeks that followed, integration ceased to be a struggle and became a celebration of possibility. The rigid hierarchy softened to accommodate consensus decision-making in appropriate situations. The flexible leadership structure gained the stability of clear protocols when they were needed. Neither approach was abandoned, but both were strengthened through combination. Emily found herself appointed as the compound's new director of external relations, responsible for coordinating with other survivor communities and establishing the networks that would rebuild civilization. It was work that suited her diplomatic nature and strategic thinking, though it meant accepting a formal leadership role she had never sought. Kahind and Dunny spent long hours together, rebuilding their relationship while managing their professional responsibilities. The sisters had changed during their separation, but the bond between them had endured. Their reunion became a symbol of hope for others who had lost family members and feared they would never see them again. As autumn arrived, Emily stood once again on the compound's walls, but the view had changed dramatically. Construction crews worked on expansion projects to accommodate their growing population. Gardens flourished in areas that had been empty lots. Radio towers reached toward the sky, connecting them to a network of allied communities that spanned 300 kilometers. The infected still shambled through abandoned streets, and hostile survivors still posed threats to anyone who ventured outside the compound's defenses. The world remained broken and dangerous, filled with loss and daily challenges that tested everyone's resolve. But it was no longer empty of hope. Dr. Uzoma approached with her evening report, a routine that had become comfortable ritual. 12 new residents this week, she announced, including a family from the eastern settlements who heard about our medical facilities. Word is spreading. Any problems with integration? Emily asked, though she expected the answer. Minor adjustments, nothing serious. People seem to adapt faster when they know others have succeeded before them. Dr. Uzoma paused, studying the activity below them. I never thought I'd see anything like this again. A real community, growing and thriving. Emily nodded, remembering her own amazement during those first weeks. The compound had become proof that civilization could be rebuilt, that people could choose cooperation over competition even in the harshest circumstances. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was possible. As night settled over the compound, lights began appearing in windows throughout the settlement. Families gathering for dinner, friends sharing conversation, children laughing in playgrounds that had been constructed from salvaged materials and stubborn hope. The sounds of life and community filled the air, a symphony of ordinary humanity that seemed lost forever. In the medical wing, McKenna worked alongside Dr. Uzoma, training new medical staff to serve the expanding network of allied communities. Her illness had brought them to this place, but her recovery had become a symbol of what could be achieved when people refused to accept that survival was enough. Somewhere in the communications center, Nia coordinated with distant settlements, sharing technical knowledge and coordinating resource distribution. Her computers connected isolated communities into a web of mutual support that grew stronger each day. The networks she had helped build were becoming the foundation for something larger than any individual settlement. The infected still lurked in the darkness beyond the walls, and the challenges of rebuilding civilization remained daunting. But as Amelie watched the lights of her community shine against the night, she knew that something irreversible had been accomplished. They had proven that fear and desperation didn't have to define the future. They had shown that even in the darkest times, people could choose to build rather than destroy, to hope rather than despair. The world would never be what it had been before the apocalypse. Too much had been lost. Too many people had died. Too much knowledge and infrastructure had been destroyed. But perhaps it could become something better, built by people who had learned to value community over competition, cooperation over conquest, hope over fear. Standing on the walls of their fortress of civilization, surrounded by the sounds of life and laughter, Amelie allowed herself to believe that the future might hold more than just survival. It might hold a chance to build something beautiful from the ashes of everything they had lost.